Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to be kicking the session off shortly. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for making some time for us this morning. Today's topic is going to be legal drafting in a virtual world. My name is Arisha Rajaram, and I am the product manager for online research solutions at LexisNexis. I'll be facilitating today's session. I'm very excited to have a great panel of speakers with us today. Together, we'll be exploring how the rapid transition to remote working has impacted briefing processes, as well as how legal documents are drafted and for what purposes. LexisNexis partnered with the Law Society South Africa earlier this year to survey the legal profession. One of the trends that we noticed was that there's been a 19% increase in online and digital research platforms over the traditional, print-based references. And that trend has actually taken place over the last 5 years, so fairly recent as well. I'm not going to share all of the research that we unpacked in that collaboration with the LSSA. But if you would like to join us in the unpacking of that survey, please keep a lookout for an invite in your inbox. That webinar is scheduled for upcoming weeks, I think in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So please join us if you can on that day. Okay, so to get things kicked off, we would love to hear from you. So if you're comfortable to do so, please use the chat feature on the right side of your screen to introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining us from today. I'm joining you from the LexisNexis offices in Morningside, Durban, and it is a lovely sunny day, a little bit windy, but the sun is out, so we're not going to complain. So very pleased to have you. I'm just going to have a look at the chat. Thank you all for the great mornings. Oh, wow, we have someone from Mauritius. That's amazing. And good morning, Cello. You were the very first one to get started in our chat. Thank you for joining us this morning. Okay, so before we kick off the panel discussion, just a few housekeeping rules. You are absolutely welcome to submit questions to our panelists. We'll get to that later on in the agenda. But when you are submitting questions, please use the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of your screen. You can use the chat feature on the right side to put in general comments or respond to some of the things that the panelists discuss, or to just share your opinions on questions that get posed as well. We encourage you to share your feedback with us as well. But please, we will only be monitoring the Q&A for questions that are submitted to the panelists. So please make sure that your question gets reviewed by us and make sure that you're putting into the Q&A tab. Lastly, the webinar is going to be recorded. We will make it available to delegates in a few days. And again, that will be shared on email as well as social media. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, without further ado, I am now going to introduce you to the very exciting panelists that we have. A very warm welcome to Advocate Christopher Rodel, Arisha Rajaram, who is a partner at Rajaram Mvulane Attorneys. And then we have Azhar Aziz Ismail, a professional support lawyer at Clyde Co. Welcome, everyone. Thank you to the panelists for joining us this morning. Okay, let's get straight into it. Chris, you've been an advocate at the KZN Society of Advocates since 2015, and you're in general civil practice. Tell me, when it comes to legal drafting, there are extensive legal resources that legal professionals would have relied on a daily basis. But how has virtual working impacted your processes?
Morning, Arisha. Morning to all the attendees. Really, prior to the COVID lockdown, I was very much using, from a research perspective, electronic resources. So I was never really a paper-based lawyer from that perspective. But certainly when it came to the drafting process, I was heavily dependent on secretary, using dictaphone. It was very much a kind of tactile process, in the sense that, you would dictate something and you'd give the physical brief and the dictaphone to the secretary. You'd then produce whatever documents you were, or yeah, whatever it was that you were wanting to draft. What I've found now, though, is that really it's not so much that the process has changed, it's really the medium by which you achieve that process or achieve the same results. So from my side now, I no longer sit in the same building as my secretary. She's, in Durban, I'm in Kloof. We have to use email a lot to send things back and forth. But what I've really found as well is that from a process perspective, working now, prior to this, you would have the document produced, then you'd sit with it and make manuscript changes to it. Now it's become very important to have documents stored electronically where they can be shared and amended and changed, both by myself or by my secretary. But I really am finding as well that there's, from my side anyway, there's a bit of a move away from really using a secretary as much as I used to. And it's really had to realize that the office is no longer really, you yourself basically become your office. Wherever you are, you have to be able to work, whether you are at home, whether you are in chambers, if you're traveling somewhere else, you've really got to be accessible, because the other big change really has been in the consulting sphere, which I think has been for most people in business as well, outside of law, that there is a much bigger shift towards video conferencing and consulting virtually. Certainly in the harder levels of the lockdown, that was much more prevalent. There does seem to be a shift now back towards more in-person consulting. But what we certainly found is that the convenience of being able to schedule a consultation with somebody in a virtual medium, it does things that you wouldn't have really expected before. So things like when you are consulting specifically to draft a document or to respond to other pleadings and so on, just the ability to, for example, share the document on the screen, and have, before, if you were going to do that in a physical consultation, you would have had to have multiple copies of the document. Now it's just a case of putting it up live and either actually producing the document there and then, with the input of clients, your instructing attorney and so on, or in the case of, for example, responding to a particular document that you are dealing with, to have that input, and have the clients and the attorneys be able to deal with it directly. So yeah, that's really the process. That's why I say the process is not really that the process itself has changed so much, but it's really the medium and the way you achieve your end result is a slightly kind of different route, maybe.
Thanks, Chris. And you mentioned that consultations went virtual for a while, and now that they are coming back into the face-to-face space. Tell me, you're obviously still doing some virtual consultations as well. Did you have to change your methods of consultation in order to get the information that you needed out of those sessions, or has there not really been, is there a difference between in-person contact versus the virtual consultations?
Well, I find there's sort of two ways a virtual consultation happens, in that it can actually be quite an impersonal experience, particularly if it's not, people don't have video on and so on. So you, especially, and what I also find though is that you will often get, particularly if you're dealing with a corporate client, you'll get a lot more people in the consultation than you would previously if it had been in person. So you on the one side, that's good because you can get a lot more information, but you also, it becomes a bit of a spectator sport as well. You've got quite a lot of people sort of sitting watching. But yeah, I think it's again, the not being in person sort of thing is that you ask a question and it kind of goes out into the vortex or into the ether, and it sort of hangs there for a while before somebody answers. So I think, just from a consulting or sort of interviewing kind of process, you do have to ask more direct questions and direct them to specific people rather than just asking a question. In person, you can look at somebody and then they know, well, the question's directed at them. But yeah, I don't think it's radically different. It's just just a little shift. But the other side of it is, I think, a lot of people who are resistant to technology or resistant to this way of doing things have now really been forced to take this route. And so, yeah, I think we've accelerated to a point where we didn't really expect to be. And so there is that people have had to adapt to that. So it has been very interesting.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, you're quite right. We're all just pushed into a corner and forced to evolve, rapidly transform as well. We definitely wouldn't have been in the legal profession would not have been in the position that they currently find themselves without the pandemic having come in as a trigger effect as well. So yeah, but I really like some of the practical tips that you alluded to when it comes to the virtual consulting space. So things like just basics, interpersonal kind of basic tips around keeping your camera on, asking pointed questions versus general questions. I think you're quite right about, when you do raise a general question, it just stays out and lingers in the vortex for a while until somebody thinks that somebody else is going to answer it or hopes that somebody else is going to answer it. So it's nice to ask the more direct question, pointed question as well. And just on a soft and fuzzy approach as well, I think I quite like the fact that the virtual consultations allow us to cut down on some of the paper-based methods that we previously engaged in and really just, embrace this virtual way of working as well. So Arisha, I'd also like to bring you in here. You're a partner at Rajaram Mvulane Attorneys. It's a Durban-based firm, as you mentioned earlier on. And I know that you are a little firm that really prides itself on being a professional, confident, strong, women-empowered firm as well. Tell me, as a small to medium-sized law firm navigating the uncertainty of the pandemic, I'm sure that now more than ever before you've needed to streamline processes, align your resources, and then also ensure that the fundamentals are still covered. I'll pose the same question to you. How would you say your processes have changed?
Thank you so much, Parusha, and good morning to all the attendees. Firstly, just to give you a bit of context, when the COVID-19 pandemic actually hit, we were about 8 months into our practice. So it really was extremely daunting. And we had the additional task of having to survive the pandemic and make sure that our firm does not crumble. So it was extremely challenging. We, as Advocate Rodel said, we also moved into the whole virtual space with Zoom consultations, Skype consultations. Not a lot of our clients were very familiar with these platforms, so it took a little bit extra to try and guide them, get them on board. In fact, we had to schedule calls before the consultation just to explain to them how Zoom actually works or how Skype actually works. And we got to a point where we just started using WhatsApp at one point because clients didn't always know how to access it or they were a little afraid. So it was quite daunting, but I believe that we've went in quite perfectly, and now people want to use these platforms instead of coming in to consult with us. There are a few that do want to have face-to-face consultations, but it's a lot less than it was initially. We've really bounced back, I must say, and we also use social media as a tool to get people to understand the pandemic and to also understand the regulations and how that will actually impact or affect them. From a research perspective, though, initially, as I said, we were quite new. So we used to make note of like the older fashioned methods of going to the law library and sitting for hours and doing our research. And that had to change. We then subscribed to LexisNexis. We started going through the practical guidance tools, the library tools, and that's helped us a lot. Even with drafting, we use AMLAs quite a bit, and we do have a hard copy, but it's really assisted us in making sure that everything is online. We can access it literally whenever we want. But the biggest issue, though, with working remotely is the fact that you can't always separate your personal life from business. You tend to go over the time periods, you work way after hours. There's really no distinction. And I know with my partner and I, we've also had a few challenges, not with communication, but it's just when does the work actually stop? So we tend to call each other at 8 or 9 o'clock at night and be like, no, but this is urgent, we need your assistance. And that's not always the best thing to do because you need to have a break. So you need to know what time to end or you will really go insane. And you need to take lunch breaks as well. So that's something I've learned and I've struggled with, and I'm starting to finally learn how to actually deal with that in the best possible way.
Thanks, Arisha. I think, when you mentioned the fact that there's no boundaries between work and personal life, a bunch of us smiled because we've all experienced it as well. And you also struck a chord with some of our attendees as well. We had Annalise who says in the chat that, yeah, totally agreeing with you. There is no end to the day. So I think that's something that we can all resonate with as well. What I really liked about what you said, though, is you were a young firm. And I think that everyone that is joining us in this webinar today can actually identify with the challenges and obstacles that a young, small to medium law-sized firm faces in those early days. So it can't have been, easy for you to have stayed in operation during this difficult time. And I think we're all very much aware of what it is that your firm must have faced in those early days as well. But yeah, if I hear you correctly, it was really your agility and ability to mobilize very quickly and embrace that transformation that really placed you in a better position to survive those early challenges, if I'm not mistaken.
That's very true. We were able to just really bounce back, and we had to sit and have various discussions as to how we were going to do this in a way that was going to really just best assist our clients as well as ourselves. And I must say, I've actually grown to like working remotely. I'm actually based in Port Shepstone and my partner's in Hillcrest. So we've got a huge distance between us, and we do have somebody at the office who does go in daily. But it is difficult, but a lot has to do with your emails and video calls. We do about 3 video calls a day, just so that everyone is on the same page. Our receptionist knows what to do. We plan our days out, but I find it a lot more easy to deal with as well. So I've got everything electronically filed and stored, and so does my partner, and we share our documents. So it is actually quite easy. We're both able to access all the information, and we always make it a habit to ensure that we're each copied on all communication to whoever it is, so that if a client has to call me, I'm able to answer questions about her clients and vice versa. So there's never a situation where somebody will say, oh, but I've spoken to Nisipo about it and she hasn't, chatted to me. Do you know what's going on? We always try to make sure that we're both on the same page and we're familiar with all client matters, so that there isn't that loophole in between where clients say, you're supposed to be working together, but nobody's really available. So it did take a lot. And yeah, we finally have a process that we follow now, and it's working out perfectly for us.
Thanks, Arisha. So business continuity was also quite key for your law firm as well, making sure that between yourself and your partner, you all shared information and stayed up to date in terms of key matters as well, so that there was some continuity when clients needed to reach out for help and assistance. Because, of course, you or your partner needs downtime every now and then, but at the same time, your clients' expectations still need to be met. They still need to be serviced. So that was one of the ways in which you all decided to tackle it. And then, of course, embracing the digital way of working, sharing of files and things like that, perhaps keeping each other BCC'd, blind copied, or at least CC'd on emails and communication, so that in the background, you were aware of what was happening in terms of all of the matters that you were attending to. Thank you. That's some really great advice as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so moving on to Azhar. You are a professional support lawyer at a large international legal firm, and you're currently developing their knowledge department. Tell me, how do you meet the challenges of gaining access to the most current versions of case law and legislation to support your colleagues with research and citation checking?
Good morning, Parusha, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for having me on this platform. I think for me, as a starting point, we've heard from Arisha of some of the experiences of the law firm talking about the drafting and the business continuity. And when it comes to moving to the virtual world because of COVID, the biggest challenge or the biggest issue that needed to be dealt with is your knowledge. In a pre-COVID world, in our law firm, we've had a law library with people are mostly comfortable with the law library, and they'd come down and help themselves to the law reports that we have down in our library, the physical law reports. They'd help themselves to the commentaries that we have available in our library. Yes, we've had online platforms for a while, but moving to a COVID world to ensure that we have the latest versions of case law and legislation, online databases and research databases, ensuring people know how to use it has become key. It's extremely important that when, especially looking for legislation, I know Google is an amazing tool for everyone, but unfortunately the reliability of the versions of your legislation is not the greatest when using Google. Many times it happens, you search for a piece of law or regulation, or even when you're looking down to the nitty-gritty of your court rules when you're in litigation. Unfortunately, there are older versions. There's no certainty whether or not you have the latest versions. So subscribing to products with your online research platforms is what helps you ensure and be comfortable and have that ease of mind that the advice that you're providing, the service that you're providing is actually the latest in the current status of the law, with online working especially. And another thing that's so crucial is current awareness. As attorneys, we need to be reading all the time. The last 2 years, maybe 3 years, have seen a lot of legal developments, especially in the litigious front. If you're based in Gauteng, the way the courts have operated have changed drastically, and there's constant changes. So there are so many different changes that are out there. And for you to be up to date with it, you need to be subscribing to newsletters. I mean, create accounts on LinkedIn, and there are certain people who you can actually follow on LinkedIn or connect with on LinkedIn that publish latest case law updates on new rules. They are companies that you can follow that will give you a lot of newsletters via LinkedIn, or you can sign up for newsletters on their websites. There are regional organizations for attorneys, area by area, that you can sign up for. You can become a member to. Some of these are free, some of these are paid. For example, the Johannesburg Attorneys Association, or the OSL Network, or the Pretoria Attorneys Association. These are some examples, but most regions have these networks where they send out newsletters, they provide support to each other. And using this is so important, especially when we move into this virtual world caused by COVID-19. You have, I mean, I'm a person who loves a physical book. The feel of a page cannot be compared. But there are so many advantages to using these online research platforms, and it also depends on the reliability of your physical resources. It often happens if you don't have a manned physical resource, you could miss out on updating that book on the loose leaves. There's loose leaflets or newer versions of the books which update the law. So using online research platforms ideally is the best way for you to actually look and double check and fact check your citations. Make sure that you're referring to the latest legislation. Make sure that you're referring to the latest case law. It often happens that cases are very quickly overturned as well. So you need to use the tools at your disposal in order to ensure that you can provide the most efficient process to your clients, product to your clients, and ensuring that you are making sure that your work is accurate. So yeah.
Thanks, Azhar. I completely agree with you. There are a lot of sources out there for monitoring current awareness. I know it's an area that you're also extremely passionate about as well, and that you are a real advocate of, you know, people in the legal profession staying up to date with the latest changes. Do you have any tips on how to sort of also manage the noise around a lot of these subscription-based products? Do you, for example, look at your email early in the morning and then, you know, get on with your workday, because you also don't want it to be too distracting in the middle of your day, because you've got things that you need to deliver on as well. Are there any practical insights that you can give us in that space?
Most definitely, and that's such an important point. So I make it a habit, and it's something that you can do. So you can set up your email. I like using Outlook. The reason why I like using Outlook to set up my emails is because I can create rules. So when I subscribe to a newsletter, I create rules and subfolders on my Outlook that the moment a newsletter comes in, it goes into a specific folder. And what that does is I make sure when I wake up in the morning and when I log onto my computer, after I make my cup of tea and have some biscuits next to me starting my day, I then open the newsletter folder and I look at the latest current awareness that's out there, the latest development from the different newsletters. There's a lot of articles that are available to read. Once I go through that, I open my LinkedIn and look at the developments there. Then I start my workday and I carry out my work. Then I also make sure that before I log off at the end of the day, I do the same process. And why do I do this? It's just to make sure that I haven't missed anything, I haven't canvassed anything. And like you said, if you subscribe to a lot of newsletters, your mailbox can quickly become full. Apart from it becoming full, it can distract you in your day from other more urgent tasks. It is extremely, extremely important to be aware of the latest developments every day. But that doesn't mean the moment something comes in, you need to drop what you're doing to read it. So plan your day, schedule times. You can even do it I do that sometimes up to 3 times a day, where I look into that folder. But that folder, having a separate folder for it is so important, because then it doesn't disrupt the other emails that may need more urgent attention during your day.
Thanks, Azhar. Some really practical insights there. Okay, moving on to the next question. So as everybody knows, we're living in a world where social distancing has become the norm, and more professionals seem to be opting to conduct briefings virtually. This has the obvious benefit of cutting down on travel time between attorney and advocate chambers, for example, but it also has the benefit of allowing you to work across provinces. Now, Arisha and Chris, I would love to get your view on how virtual briefings has worked for you and why. What are the challenges you might have experienced during the transition? What has specifically worked for you about the model that you all have selected in your respective spaces? And are there any tips that you can offer our attendees this morning on how they can maximize their hours and work more efficiently in the virtual space? Chris, do you also note that there was a question from a candidate attorney who had a very similar question as well? He wanted to know about, should he take up physical chambers or virtual chambers? So perhaps you could also tackle that in the feedback that you provide.
Sure, Arisha. So just to go on the sort of virtual briefings and that, I haven't actually worked with Arisha, but I've worked with her partner, Nazipo, or been briefed by her in quite a few matters. And I've never received a physical brief from their firm. It's all been either by sharing folders containing all the relevant documents, or else it's been by email. And look, your main advantage is it's the speed that things can be delivered, not having to either give the brief to a messenger or a courier and have it sent from wherever. And the sort of strange thing though that happened was, I think the first matter that they ever sent me was a matter in Johannesburg Labour Court, and for some reason I got it in my head that you guys were a Joburg firm. And it was only sort of like 2 or 3 briefs down the line that I suddenly realized, oh no, you guys are in Morningside. So that's a sort of strange thing that can happen. Yeah, so I think they have worked. I think what they have done is take the existing way things were done and make it faster and more convenient. The downside, though, is I find that there can be a little sort of lack of attention to detail when it comes to virtual sort of exchanging documents virtually. It is that sort of piecemeal process where you kind of get things bit by bit rather than in a sort of well-organized brief. I mean, this is particularly from the advocate side. So, yeah, that's sort of the other side of it. So you do get the great convenience, but then obviously the flip side to that is if there is something missing, it's just a quick, whether it's a WhatsApp message, an email, phone call, whatever, and you can have that document in 5 minutes rather than saying, okay, well, now we're going to send it. So again, I think it's more about that kind of mindset change of saying that we're all willing to work in this way now, rather than having people who perhaps wanted to work in a more traditional way. The issue of holding virtual chambers and physical chambers, I really do feel for guys that are coming through now as pupils or first-year advocates. Pupillage is pretty much unrecognizable from what it was. I had a pupil this year, or still have a pupil this year. And compared to when I did pupillage, it's completely different. And coming into this financial situation as well, it's going to be tough, and I understand the economic realities. Look, it's going to be one of those sort of slightly unhelpful answers, though, because it's really going to depend on the rules of the society that you choose to join. I think most of the bars, the sort of traditional bars, will require you to hold physical chambers somewhere. I know some of them will have more lenient rules when it comes to sharing of chambers for people starting out. But I think the best advice I can give you is look at the society that you're joining, look at their rules, and then see what they will allow and won't allow, and try and work creatively within that space. I do have to know I don't have any real personal knowledge of virtual chambers and how that works. But it would be very much dependent on the rules of your particular society.
Thanks, Chris. I think it was Selo that asked the question about the virtual chambers. So Selo, I'd also ask you to just keep an eye out for a webinar that we did just last week, Thursday, where we launched the virtual law chambers. We hosted a little launch session for the virtual law chambers. It was a collaboration event between LexisNexis and virtual law chambers. And we covered some of the questions that Chris has actually alluded to just now in that session as well, where we spoke about whether the respective legal professional councils actually allow for virtual law chambers to be adopted by young advocates or not. The short answer is that yes, in that instance they did, but have a look out for that webinar. I think you'll get access to some really key information that you'd be looking for in order to make your decision. But Chris, I also hear you in that I think it's very much apart from the regulatory requirements, it's also very much a personal decision that you have to take. And it really depends on your approach as an advocate as well, whether you are someone who prefers working in a physical environment, whether you can work virtually, whether you're set up to work virtually as well, or whether you need a little bit of that division between work and personal life as well, and are a person more suited to coming into the office. So it's also those sort of personal factors that would play a role in that type of decision making, I think.
I think it would be very much your personal choice and how you would prefer to work. The other side of that, yes, you have all the benefits of, virtual chambers, being able to work from wherever you are. But the other side of that, the sort of traditional strength of the bar system is the collegiality, which I think it's possible to replicate it in a virtual chambers environment, but you'd have to, I think quite carefully about what you also miss out on not being in a set of chambers with 15, 20, 30, 50 other advocates. I'm not sure how you would replicate that in the virtual world, because it really is invaluable to be able to go and chat to anyone senior to you when you're starting out, asking for help on how to do things. And that has been the traditional strength of the bar, that willingness to assist younger practitioners and give them that help. While it of course it's a personal decision, and it obviously, you want to do things that would suit your lifestyle and so on, you also need to bear factors which are not necessarily immediately apparent in mind when you make this kind of decision.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. It's interesting that you raised that, Selo. Again, I'm going to ask you to look at that webinar, because what the virtual law chambers have done is something quite interesting. I'm not going to give too much away though, because it's not the purpose of this session, but just a little tidbit, have a look out for something called a knock-knock feature that they introduced in order to facilitate that the collegiality amongst the profession, and make sure that there's a reference point for young attorney or for young advocates as well. Okay, thanks, Chris, for all of those insights. Arisha, just back to you to bring you into this conversation as well. Now, Chris has spoken about briefing from his side and the sort of pros and cons of it in the virtual space. On the whole, though, it seems to be largely positive, and the ability to get access to information almost instantly is definitely a more efficient way of working during these times. Also saves on, courier costs and things like that, which is great. But from your perspective, are there any tips or insights that you can share with the team today?
So when it comes to virtual briefings, I actually really prefer that. I think I've also gotten quite used to that as well, because when I did start briefing counsel, it actually happened during the pandemic. So it's something I've just learned to deal with, and I actually enjoy it. It cuts down on having to print like tons of documents and make sure everything's compiled. Now you can do your brief electronically, compile everything in email, forward all the documents through. So it's actually quite a good time saver, and it also reduces printing costs as well from our side. So I really enjoy that. With regard to working virtually, though, I personally believe boundaries is extremely important. Make sure you've got time dedicated for certain activities of the day. And as Azhar said as well, make sure you schedule time to read through your emailers and to respond to emails, know when you're going to be doing your drafting in the day, because things can really get away from you. I know with me, I start with emails first thing in the morning and then try and do my drafting from like 10 o'clock to 2. But there's always things that pop up. You can never really say, I'm going to sit down and just draft all day or sort out the summons or that particular application. It's all time consuming, and it really takes a lot out of you if you aren't focused and actually doing it. There's also calls that you need to attend to, but make sure you've got your boundaries as to when your offices will close, whether it's virtual or not. And then on weekends, what is your routine on the weekends? Are you going to be sitting and working all day? A lot of the time, you don't really have a choice. You've got additional work that needs to be done, but it shouldn't be a thing where clients start taking advantage of you. And we've had that where clients will call at like 11 o'clock at night just to follow up on their matters. So it's a lot to do with boundaries working virtually. That's the biggest tip I can give you. I've learned that the hard way.
Yeah, definitely something we can all resonate with. And Arisha, when it comes to the compiling the e-brief as well to an advocate, would you suggest, Chris mentioned, for example, that folders get exchanged, that your partner exchanged a folder containing all of the documentation pertaining to a particular matter with him. Would you suggest some practical tips, like perhaps making sure that the documents are set out in chronological order or clearly labeled and identified, numbered perhaps, in order to make sure that the list is ordered and structured as well, and that if you are referencing documents in the brief, that there's a little bit of an index as well that, relates to all of the documentation, and maybe a little description in terms of what that item refers to or what it discussed. I think we've all fallen into that trap as well, where I will take an email from Outlook and then just save it over, and the subject line is what appears as the name, which is meaningless in a lot of different contexts. So, do little tips like that make a difference as well?
Definitely. So what I actually do is I have a checklist, and I will make sure I follow my checklist. And then when I actually label documents, I will make sure the label is the same in the document as it is in the actual brief. And then label it according to, well, this would fall or form part of your Annexure A. It'll be, for example, your lease agreement. And then this will be the first letter or whatever it is. So I do try to make sure that it is actually labeled identically. But as you said, when you paste an email or save an email, it doesn't always have the same format. So I'll use the email heading subject line and then say, this is actually what the email contains. But I always keep a checklist, and then I mark it off before I send it. Whatever's in my folder, I tick it off to say, okay, the lease agreement's been attached, this has been attached, that's been attached. I find checklists to be very helpful.
I really like that tip of the checklist. I think that's some really good practical insight into how to improve the process as well. Thanks for sharing that with us today.
Thank you.
Azhar, let's move on to you. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from moving from a more physical library to an online resource? How's it impacted your processes within your work as a knowledge manager? And lastly, because we want to focus on the practicality today, what are some of the tips that you can share with our audience?
It's some very interesting questions, and the approach is very different organization by organization. But for us, like you, when you introduced me, I work at an international law firm, and we have a physical library. Over the last year or so, actually just before COVID, we've seen a drive, firstly, from our international knowledge department, where we're looking to move away from extending and building physical resources, and rather looking to electronic resources as a starting point. So the question of the challenges and the lessons learned from a physical library to an online one is very relevant, especially for me. Now, one of the biggest challenges that I've seen is bridging the gap between the older and the younger generation. For me, that has been a key challenge. It's something that I'm still figuring out, but I think I've gotten a hang of it. When it comes to this, you have your older generation who's still very comfortable and amenable with using physical resources, going to the library, pulling a book, and looking for the resource. Sitting in a consultation with a client, bringing the book with you, the law report or the commentary, and having flags on it. Highlighting on printed copies of documents. That's sort of how people have been working in the past. With COVID-19 especially, the importance of an online research resource is so important. And in order to bridge that gap, what I found that's important is two things. It's a drive for learning and development, a drive to train people and to ease people into things. So you don't start off, for example, saying, using LexisNexis as an example, here's LexisNexis, this is how to search, this is practical guidance, this is this, this is this, this is this. Because especially with your older generation who are so accustomed to the way that they work, it's an information overload. The technology that's available to us today is really amazing. And what then happens is that the message gets lost in translation. People are now scared to adopt. Lawyers in general, and I've seen this globally by speaking to colleagues across the world, and it's a trend across the world. Lawyers are generally very slow to trust and adopt technology. They're very slow when it comes to that because the trust aspect, and the time that it takes to learn new technology is precious time that's taken, but it's definitely valuable time. So a drive within an organization for learning, a thirst for learning is so important. There's a quote that comes to mind: you need to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. You must be flexible and adaptable. So when it comes to training people, you start off with the basics. So again, if you use LexisNexis as an example, especially when you're training your old generation, you start off with, right, okay, so this is LexisNexis, and if you're looking for case law, this is how you find it. You show the basics. This is what you need. All the nice to haves and the nitty-gritty features that really help you become efficient in your drafting skills, those are things that you can introduce at a later stage, having staged out training, and if you show everything at once, a person is not going to remember it, especially when you're extremely busy. So those are some of the key insights that I'd have when you're looking at moving from a physical to an online library. Another thing that's so important when you're dealing with this, especially bearing in mind the COVID-19 reality that we're living in, the new world that we're living in. If you have a physical library, when I say library, the word library could sometimes be used as a stretch. It could mean a collection of books that you have in a cabinet in your office. And I'm well aware that there are a lot of smaller law firms as well that may not have a dedicated room for a library. That doesn't mean you don't have a library. You may have a shelf with books, a collection of books that you've used and that are helpful. That is still a library for you. Now, when it's a shared resource of books, what then happens in the COVID reality, one, is you're probably not in the office if you're working remotely. So now you need to travel to the office to get the book. The other disadvantage with having a physical library resource is now in the COVID reality, you need to ensure that people sanitize their hands before and after using this resource. Then there's also the issue of sharing the resource. What if you and I, Arisha, both need the resource at the same time? Now, when it comes to online resources, this is the interesting part. You can actually speak to your service provider and say, listen, I'm 5 people in the law firm. Can I have a license agreement that allows 2 people to log in at the same time and use the same resource at the same time? Or can I have a resource that only allows, I'm 1 person, I only need 1 person? Or I'm a larger law firm, I have about 100 employees, I need a license for each employee. And your service providers have structured payment agreements and pricing based on the type of product that you use. And also the way that you access this. It's so accessible. When you're working from home, you don't have to drive into the office. You can quickly pull something up. If you're searching for specific things within a document, the advantage of having an online library resource as opposed to a physical library, if it's a book that you haven't used in a while, a commentary you haven't used in a while, you're probably going to want to look at the index, look through the index. There's an index of, or the contents page, the index of words at the back of the book to try and help you find that content. Whereas when you have electronic research resources, you have AI and smart technology that helps you search and filter using smart words that you use and using filtering to get your content and narrow down your content. When you're doing research, especially for opinions and case law, I mean, there are hundreds of cases that you can refer to. And when you're using a physical library, you're relying solely on that, you're probably only going to refer to the cases that founded those principles, where those principles were developed. The newer case law, you might miss some cases. So having an online research platform not only helps make sure that your information is correct and accurate, but it helps providing more supporting resources that actually show you that, listen, the courts are actually still agreeing with certain provisions or principles that were set down years ago. So it is so important that you use these resources. And when it comes to using resources and within the knowledge scope as well, having a knowledge resource, you can look into the needs. Where you have multiple people working, accessing these resources can be different. For example, with LexisNexis, you could say, listen here, we're only 3 people, or we're 50 people. Can we have 50 separate individual licenses? There are also packages within the knowledge industry globally that allow larger organizations, which makes it more affordable for them to use what they call IP authentication. And you'd have to use a VPN or be at your office premises to access those materials. So there's so many things that we can use to help you streamline your research, and using an online platform or online resources really do help you with that.
Thanks, Azhar. So what I'm getting out of the themes that you explored as well is that, yes, there are some stumbling blocks to adopting online research practices within a law firm. You mentioned some of the cultural shifts that are needed, some of the change management processes that you need to embrace as part of that transition as well. But overall, it provides for a lot more efficient research experience, if I could use that word, and actually saves you on time as well at the end of the day. It does require some upskilling initially. So there is a little bit of a steep learning curve, but once you've gotten through those initial hurdles, online research is definitely the way to go because of the time-saving component of it as well. And also the pandemic, precautions and protocols that you save on and that you don't have to be mindful of when you're in the digital space.
Definitely, I agree. It's a lovely summary.
Okay. Well, you're very eloquent as well, Azhar. Okay, so we are running out of time because this has been such an interesting and constructive discussion amongst the team this morning. I think I was also looking at some of the comments in the chat as well, and we've definitely gotten some really great conversation going. There have been some comments around from some of the attendees that agree with some of the things that Arisha said, Chris said, Azhar said as well. So I think we've struck a chord amongst the attendees today. But what I'd like to do now is actually, let's just look at the Q&A and look at some of the comments that have come through here. We're not going to be able to answer all of the questions, unfortunately, but let's just see if we can get to some of the critical ones. There's a question from Danny Pollard, who asks, what is the importance granted to the sharing of documents virtually? Is there any difference between a scanned form of an original document versus the original one? Chris, perhaps that's something that you'd like to take on?
Sure, Arisha. I suppose it depends what the question really means. If you're talking about admissibility of a document in terms of a court setting, then your ordinary rules of evidence would apply. Generally, you're going to require the original unless you have agreement otherwise between the parties. It's the question of whether the authenticity of a document is disputed or not, in which case you would generally need the original unless the original's been destroyed. But if you're talking about it from a drafting perspective and a sort of work perspective, the major weakness of scanned documents versus document that's been produced electronically and then made into PDF format or converted into PDF format has become very difficult to move information between the two unless you've got something that will use some sort of OCR, optical character recognition process to extract the information from that document and convert it into, for example, Word format. But yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I think sharing documents in a virtual setting is becoming more and more important, rather than having physical documents. And so, having that capacity to store them somewhere electronically and have them be properly labeled and filed and accessible is becoming extremely important, perhaps probably critical to the way we practice.
Thanks, Chris. And then as just a very practical question directed at you from one of our attendees as well. When it comes to achieving the elusive work-life balance, are there any insights that you can share that's worked in your personal space?
So to achieve work-life balance, that's it is really a hot topic, and it stems differently. It's very different person to person in how you react to different things. But that person that I am is, if I hear my phone ping, I can't leave it. If I read an email, there's no unreading it. Even if it says, I need this tomorrow only, I'm the type of person that will jump at it and jump straight at it. So to achieve that work-life balance, what you need to do is, when you set those type of boundaries for yourself, also it depends on where you are in your career. As a candidate attorney, you need to be a lot more flexible and more available for your team. But as an attorney, you need to sort of set a cutoff time for yourself. And when you do set the cutoff time, I use Microsoft Outlook on my phone as well. And there's a lovely snooze feature for your email notifications. So I turn that on, because I know if I don't turn that on, I'm going to get that notification and I'm going to end up working overtime or jumping and straight working into something. It could be 1 in the morning, it could be 10 in the evening. That's just who I am. The other thing that I would suggest that you do as well is, when you set those boundaries and those times, set an alarm on your phone. I normally set 3 alarms within the last half an hour leading for me to sort of end off my day. Plan your day. Helping plan your day will help you plan when you're going to end each day. So I set alarms to say, okay, the first alarm, you've got half an hour left, start wrapping up. The second alarm, 15 minutes left, okay, finalizing. The third alarm, it's like you're putting yourself in an exam situation, pens down kind of thing. Let's just wrap up, send off, and make sure everything is done for the day. But it also depends on the situation that you're in. Sometimes urgency may require you to go beyond that. But it's very important to have that sort of personal life balance, and yeah, shut off.
I love the pens down reference. It takes me back to the varsity days in a big way. So thanks for sharing those tips with us. Okay, well, look, we have reached, or we're almost at time. So I just want to say a very quick thank you to all of our panelists for the insights around some of the challenges and opportunities that you've shared with us this morning. I really do appreciate the time that you've taken out to carve out in your diaries to join us today, and to all of our attendees as well. We have reached the end of our Q&A slot. What I'd like to do now is to introduce you to a new solution that LexisNexis has recently launched. It is called Lexis Check. It is a Microsoft Word toolbar that helps you create accurate, clear, and error-free legal documents with confidence. From heads of argument to pleadings or opinions, you can be sure that the legislation and case law references you've used are accurate, targeted, and up to date. So we're going to play a little short video for you now, which will start.
In today's fast-paced legal sphere, legal practitioners are under constant pressure to draft legal documents as quickly and efficiently as possible without sacrificing accuracy. But what if you could reduce manual document checking and be freed up to do higher value legal work? With Lexis Check, you can. Lexis Check is a first for South Africa. LexisNexis have created an independent Microsoft Word toolbar that helps you draft accurate, clear, and error-free legal documents with confidence. From heads of argument to pleadings or opinions, you can be sure that the legislation and case law references you've used are accurate, targeted, and up to date. Lexis Check scans your document, flags legislation and case law references that need your attention, and links directly to LexisNexis services without leaving Word, saving you valuable time and resources. Draft accurate, clear and error-free legal documents with confidence. Be sure that the legislation and case law references you've used are accurate, targeted and up to date. With the click of a button, Lexis Check will scan, review and update citation references on your MS Word document. Dive deeper by using the Lexis Check navigation to review recommended corrections to your document. View full details and choose to accept or reject the recommended citation corrections. Existing Lexis Library subscribers can even seamlessly integrate into their subscription to go directly to the case or legislation in question. LexisNexis have simplified legal research with Lexis Check. Contact us today to learn more about how you can increase your drafting productivity and accuracy with the first and most accessible tool of its kind in South Africa.
Thank you. So as I close, there is going to be a poll that launches on your screen. If you could take just 2 minutes of your time to answer a few questions that we put together there. There are only about 3 or 4 questions. Please share your feedback with us. And then what I've also done is I've posted links in the chat to our respective LinkedIn profiles. If you'd like to connect with any one of the panelists today or myself, please look us up on LinkedIn, use the link that's in the chat and connect with us. We'll be very excited to engage with you and hear from you. And lastly, just a reminder that the recording is going to be made available to all attendees in a few days. And thank you for joining us. Stay safe and stay well. Take care.